Hello and welcome to Ibby's Digital Nomad Stories, featuring real conversations with professionals who've cracked the code to sustainable nomadic lifestyles. These people aren't beach and Wi Fi chasers, they're building competitive advantages that traditional employment could never match. Global mobility, income diversification, and the freedom to capitalize on opportunities anywhere. I'm Ibi Malik, your favorite digital nomad consultant. And today I'm joined on the show by Jocelyn Macurdy Keatts, someone who spent 10 years trying to save the world from inside Washington, D.C. She was doing the work, producing events for politicians, on camera reporting for protests, but the system swallowed her whole. Networking became performance. Activism became about who you know, not what you are trying to solve. So she left. She told herself she just wanted to travel. But what she actually discovered was perspective. Distance gave her clarity that the insiders never had. She could see problems and solutions more objectively, thinking long-term instead of just chasing viral moments. She focused on what worked, not what the power networks demanded. Now she runs political campaigns from French castles, more effective than she ever was in DC. Turns out the best way to change the system is to see it from the outside. Here's Jocelyn. So, Jocelyn.
Yes, Ivy, hi.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you for the very first
It's
time.
like we've never met before.
I feel this rapport with you, this comfort. I don't know where it comes from, but I really enjoy it.
It's almost as if we lived together for 6 weeks.
Something like that.
Something like that. Oh, well, how do you make money as a nomad?
So I have been a political consultant in Washington, D.C. for about 10 years. And then after COVID hit, I wanted to start traveling.
Mm.
What I was, I think, less aware of when I started doing it is I was actually just completely burnt out on Washington politics specifically. And you're a Londoner, so I think you know the specific burnout that you can have from big power centers where there's this kind of ambient narcissism and everything costs thousands of pounds. So
Thank you for saying pounds.
you're welcome. I know my audience.
Thank you. Yes, it does cost thousands of pounds or dollars.
So I just started traveling and I took with me the freelance work that I could do from anywhere.
After 10 years of building your political life.
Yeah. So for me, for reference, what I do is I help candidates and activists build a media profile. Because in the US, and this is problem also exists other places, there's a significant right-wing media bias. So it takes quite a bit of strategy for people who are on the right side of history to actually get the attention they deserve. But what I don't think I really realized is that it wasn't just about wanting to travel. I feel like being kind of baked in this big American power city had kind of wounded my relationship with activism in a lot of ways, you know? I don't know if you can relate to that, if you ever felt that way, but it felt like the things that I wanted to do were kind of being distorted by all these layers of influence and networks of power and funding. And I was just kind of like, what if I just left? What's the worst that could happen?
So you're saying it's more of you got stuck in some kind of loop, in some kind of circle?
Kind of. It's kind of I think that for me, I got into progressive politics because I wanted to save the world, right? That's what everybody wants when they're 19 years old. And
good reason as any. World needs some saving.
You go into this world, and it's kind of there are so many people with power and money, and instead of saving the world, you're trying to form these relationships and keep these relationships, and it becomes increasingly unclear, okay, is this leading to anything? Or am I just kind of stuck in this narcissistic social system, you know? And I want to be clear, none of this was super conscious when I decided to leave. I decided to leave because I was just you know what? I'm just going to travel for a while. Why not? I'm going to write my media advisories from the Greek islands. Sounds nice. But as I traveled more and met other travelers, I realized there was actually something much deeper going on with why I left and why I was staying away.
Such as?
So I've been thinking about how to put this into words.
Tell me.
So
even if it doesn't make sense, let's see if we can make it make sense.
I think that a lot of times when you have a career that's based in one place, you know, as we in the Nomad community call them normies, like you end up like,
muggles.
Your life ends up being weighed down with all these concerns that feel so important, but they aren't, right? Like maybe you need to have this expensive flat or car, and then you're seeing all these people every week, and then there's not really a lot of energy left over to be creative, to be intrinsically motivated, to really think about like, okay, what am I doing with my career? And I think this is so important because there's a stereotype of nomading that you're just always on holiday and you're working from a beach in Thailand. But really, and I know I'm not alone in this, I have found like my creative and intellectual energy so much more available when I'm not weighed down with this like kind of like daily energy tax of having to maintain a muggle existence.
A normie existence.
Yeah. Did you feel like that too?
Yes and no, in varying ways, actually. I would say yes in the way that when I was surrounded by the normality of routine life, a lot of my life would be taken up by those routines.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any external influence to challenge those routines, and those routines somehow just became bigger and bigger. Like Saturday was just, you know, a write-off with just doing some chores around the house.
Totally.
Whereas now I've made those things so efficient that it's like Saturday is absolutely free, and those things are just slotted into my week in other places. So yeah, I do think that. I also think it's nice to have some of that routine. And it's necessary that no matter where you are, how you travel, what you're doing, you still maintain some of those routines. For me, it's like meal prepping and that kind of stuff, and doing my taxes and finances. But I agree in many ways. Okay, I got a question.
Tell me.
So you said that it limited or inhibited your creativity in some way being in the same place. And you kind of, was it re-sparked by traveling? And if so, how?
So, okay. So I want to be full disclosure honest for anyone who wants to become a nomad. I feel like there is this period, maybe it's a few months, maybe it's a year, where you're kind of acclimating and you're not going to be terribly like, you know. And I think we should tell the truth about that, right? Like there is this period where probably you're getting used to this situation where you're switching countries and cultures all the time. But after that, I was kind of shocked by how much I was suddenly taking on projects that were more important and more exciting and more challenging and more existentially aligned with the things that I cared about than ever before, because I wasn't stuck in this limiting idea of what it meant to be a political activist or what it meant to be, you know, to create charismatic media campaigns, because I wasn't just stuck in this sphere where everybody's kind of saying the same things and doing the same things. You know, I expected so many things from traveling the world, but I really didn't expect how much my career would take off because I was traveling the world and because I was meeting people every day in these co-livings that are just kind of challenge your assumptions about...
Can you give some examples of assumptions and how they were challenged?
Well, okay.
It's a hard question. I know that.
No, I mean, it's a great question. I think I feel a little guilty. I think everyone uses this, but German friends.
I'm intimately familiar with the German people.
You know, I found myself building this kind of alternate life in Berlin, and, you know, German assumptions about what professionalism looks like and what intellectual honesty looks like are so different. And, you know,
to American,
right. Yeah. to American paradigms of networking and creativity. And like in forming these relationships, suddenly I was finding myself to be more organized, yes, but also like more anti-fragile and more willing to look at things in a completely opposite way. And this is something that...
What does anti-fragile mean?
You know, like...
Anti-fragile.
Have you...
Anti-fragile, oh my God. What does anti-fragile mean?
So it's an economics term. It rose in popularity around COVID. This idea that systems can sustain some kind of traumatic catastrophe, but still be resilient. And I think about this word a lot in terms of nomading. I think it builds, if you're going to be a serious professional and become a nomad, you might be in for this period of like anti-fragility building, kind of, where you're just becoming more aware of like, what do I want to create? What kind of problems do I want to solve? And how do I actually do that? Versus kind of relying on your network to tell you what to do, or relying on, you know, what everyone else is doing in your sphere. You know, for me, it's political, but I do think this applies to startup culture, writing, creativity. I've seen so many other nomads who are very similar in the sense that when you stop assuming that everything everyone else is doing is correct, you might actually be in for the craziest ride of your life. Because you're just like, I'm just going to try shit. Why not?
You're absolutely right. Actually, and you touch on a really, I think, important point of the nomadic existence, which is that you kind of become more resilient to the world because small things don't faze you the same way that they used to faze you. Actually, Katya was saying this at some point. She said that when she first told her friends that she was hitchhiking across India, she said it in such a nonchalant way, like I just hitchhiked across India, because for her it becomes such a small thing because she's done it so much. But to the normies, it was like, what the hell? How, like, cannot fathom. But you become more resilient to these small challenges, like, how do I get from place A to B without money? Like, oh my God, it's not actually a big problem anymore because I've done it so many times. I got so used to it.
Yes.
That you kind of just start to think differently.
Okay, so I think that in the before times, you know, I think normal people are running on this assumption that like a great life is built on figuring it out. But actually that never happens, right? Because you get older, the economy changes, maybe technology changes. So realistically, even if you stay in the same place your whole life, this idea of comfort is a complete illusion. And the edge you give yourself when you become a nomad is you kind of know that. You're prepared for that because your life is changing every month, every 2 months. So you no longer become allergic to this idea that things can be totally different at the end of this business quarter, you know, where I saw this a lot when I was living in DC and New York. Like, people would do something, it works, and now for the next 5 years, next 10 years, they're trying to like...
just replicate that
exact same thing. But the world has changed. And as nomads, I don't see us falling prey to that problem. And in the modern economy, comfort is the enemy. You know, I mean, everyone's always talking about AI, but it doesn't matter what it is. Disruption is kind of the law of the modern workforce. And I think you should kind of just like internalize that and accept that.
You are an oracle. I think we should be friends.
Can we, please?
I think we should.
I was hoping it wasn't just about the podcast, but...
It wasn't just about the podcast. I think we should be friends. I agree with you. Let's talk about this nomadic mindset now, because I think with nomads, the world thinks that nomads are location independent and they can do whatever they want. And it's true in a way. But I believe that it's a specific mindset that nomads get from traveling that allows them to capitalize on more opportunities It's like I'm not just free in terms of my location, I'm free in terms of how I think. I'm free in terms of what opportunities I can capitalize on. It's no longer just my dad was a plumber, so I'm going to become a plumber. It's like, oh my God, I could do anything. What can I do? I can go anywhere. Where can I go? How does that nomadic mindset relate to your world?
So thank you for saying that. You're so smart.
You're so smart. You said it first.
So I don't think it's a secret, and I don't think I'm letting the side down when I say that the American left is in trouble. And a big part of that is because, going back to the Clintons and Obama, at the beginning of the American democratic digital consulting age, the left was ahead of the right. And so it's kind of what we were just talking about. Like, people are still chasing that high of like, let's run the same campaign over and over and over again. And people keep losing. And
why?
Because they're going to the same parties with the same people. They're sharing the same bad advice. Look, I can't believe I'm saying this on something that's going to be public, but I don't care. It's just the truth. Like, people that ran Hillary's campaign, they still work in politics. They still run campaigns. And I don't necessarily think they're bad people. I think they are in Washington and New York, talking to the same people, replicating the same strategies over and over again. And it's destroying the US, which, because of America's geopolitical impact, has ramifications for the entire planet. It's terrifying. And it's so funny because people look at my life and are like, how are you so involved in American politics when you're out in the world? It's like, well, being out in the world is going to make you more aware and more cognizant of how important the American project really is. Like, love or hate America, like, what happens in the US impacts everybody. And I mean, we were just chatting about this. I really do think anyone who lives in the US should get out of the US for a period. But especially if you are in any way involved with America's government, get out of the country and like really understand what's at stake. But it's a kind of ennui, I think. And it's something that we have to fix.
You mentioned anti-fragility, which applies in politics and applies in your personal life. But let's say I'm the average American political worker. What would I expect to gain? What perspective would I expect to shift if I was to leave and experience something different?
Well, I think the biggest thing that shifted for me as an American is I've never been like a money motivated person, but I think one of the biggest benefits for Americans living abroad is to really understand that like money and capitalism is not the central driver of most cultures. That's a very uniquely American problem. Mm-hmm. And in the US, there can be this professional issue where people think if something is profitable, it's working. Mm-hmm. When just as frequently the opposite is true, right? A profit incentive can disrupt the actual deliverables to where like, oh, it's making so much money, clearly. And that I think was the biggest way that I became more creative, because instead of like when I was in, again, like, DC, New York, whatever, like instead of being distracted by how much money something makes, it was like, how are we going to solve this problem? And here's the funny thing. If you solve a problem and you solve it really well, it will eventually become profitable. Maybe not immediately, but if you're looking to form a career built on brilliance and acumen over the long haul, like it's a better thing to be really good at what you do than to make a few thousand extra dollars tomorrow, And that especially applies to politics. In a world where how you solve problems and how you make money can become totally separate questions. And healthcare too. Like it's a similar problem. In America right now, the things that make a lot of money and the things that make people better have almost nothing to do with each other. And obviously people are dying at an alarming rate.
It is a big matter of perspective. I think perspective for me is always the key word. Perspective for me is always the one that's like, yeah, what is the way of thinking that we grew accustomed to, that we were taught, that we were given, that we were fed, that is actually not true once you sit back and challenge it, even just the slightest bit.
Yeah.
And the whole glass just cracks around you, and then you're like, okay, nothing is as I first thought it really was. And that does make you think differently. Interesting. Okay, let's go back to politics.
Please.
Let's go back to politics. What does it mean to do your job? What do you actually do day to day? How do you find clients? How do you convince people that you're actually doing something that benefits you and the work you're doing and is not acting to the work's detriment?
Yeah. So, I think we have a consultant surplus in the world right now. I don't think anyone would fight with that. So if I were 10 years younger and I were trying to build a profitable consulting business of any kind, it would be like, okay, what problem am I trying to solve? And then demonstrate over and over again that I can solve that problem. One of my favorite quotes is, the best thing that could happen to a person is to fall completely in love with a problem and not fall out of love with it until a better problem comes along. It's a good one, right?
It is. It makes you think very playfully about the problem and creatively about the problem. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
This is just my baby now. I have to solve this problem.
And so for me, when I lived in DC, I was producing big events for politicians and activists and like an on-camera reporter for a lot of these kinds of like events and protests and things like that. And now what I do is I produce digital events for the same type of people. And I also do a lot of like left-wing PR, like, okay, hey, you're doing this amazing thing. Let me get reporters to talk to you. And, interestingly enough, being out of the US has actually made me much better at both of those things, because instead of having this idea of what that would look like, I get very, very, very clear on the data of like, okay, what is this reporter's reach? Are they actually an authority here? Where when I was living in DC, I would end up reaching out to the reporters I knew, right? And I don't think I'm alone in this. You develop this kind of availability heuristic where you're just thinking about the people you talk to every day.
Yeah.
I want to be clear, when it comes to politics, I'm sure there are a lot of jobs you couldn't do remotely, but there's so many that you could, data analytics, like, polling, so many of these things that I actually think being international would allow you to think more creatively about these problems versus just being kind of sucked into the funnel of what everyone else is already talking about.
I want to talk about the reporters again. Because we talked before about perspective and how traveling gives you a different perspective on the world based on what you see. But what you mentioned before is about looking at a reporter, using that as an example, objectively, and saying, what's their reach? What can they do for me? You kind of, because you've dissociated yourself from the situation, you can see it from a third-party perspective, perhaps. And the reason that comes to mind for me is because in consulting, for typical business financial problems, it's the same. You look at the business objectively. You have to exit you can't get caught in the middle of the business. You have to take a step back and look at it objectively and say, why is this business doing badly?
Yes.
And you've mentioned the same thing about the reporter. What does that objectivity mean to you? What does that perspective back into the US, where you can now look at things objectively and make better decisions? What does that mean to you? How does it play out in your life?
Well, so from a professional perspective, one problem that American politics has, and I think unfortunately this is spreading everywhere, where you kind of have these like weird viral moments that everyone's trying to jump on, right? And it's like, oh, like this big thing just happened and we're all talking about it. But being kind of out of that, and being here with you, and like my emotional energy is so much more thinking in terms of, how do we win in midterms this year? How do we win 5 years from now? And I'm able to instead like think more clearly, okay, like this thing is going viral, but this is probably not going to be going viral next week. Where when I was living in the US, I didn't have that emotional objectivity, you know, because I'm going to parties where everyone else is also hyper fixated on this one thing. But here I can more be like, okay, like, yeah, I don't really need to, you know, my client or me doesn't really need to be a part of this conversation. They need to be a part of this more substantial, you know, thing that has legs. And repeatedly, I've had that experience of like, when you're able to be objective and think long term, you frequently accidentally become part of a viral conversation because you've built something sustainable. You know, a really good example of this. So I produced something called the Resistance Labs for Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, where she teaches people nonviolent resistance tactics. It's definitely like the project I'm most excited about right now. And we had one planned for the week that Alex Preddy was killed. And so our attendees went from like, you know, like about 1,000 people to like 6,000 signups. And that's just such a better way to build something that can make a difference, because we've been doing these every month for like a year. And then it happened to collide with a viral moment. And, you know, now we have all this attention and all that stuff. But it was coming from a place of stability, not from this manic place of trying to force yourself into a conversation, you know?
How do you resist the urge to conform and just do whatever? Surely you must think there's a viral thing happening. I got to jump on that, or like a fear of missing out, or a fear of like, oh my God, everybody's talking about, I don't know, do you feel like everybody's talking about this one thing? You should be connecting with it. Your heart should be with it. There's something happening in the world that my people are going through. Should I not be connecting with that? How do you separate and distance yourself from that emotion?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I think that the emotion to stay current in that way often comes from a good place, right? Like people are trying to, you know, when I was really young and I would go to these trainings on like press and media and things, you know, that the first thing they say is like, insert yourself in the viral conversation. But 10 years in this field, and I'm very aware it can backfire, because instead of building authority and building substance and, you know, trust, basically, you're just kind of becoming this like reactive Twitter bot to whatever's happening. And I like to think that if I stayed in the US, I would have become aware of that. But I think leaving and being a nomad, and obviously I go back to America a lot, so I don't want to make it sound like I've never been to the US before, but leaving has made that self-awareness way more, built it way faster than it would have otherwise. And I just feel way more like secure, you know? Because if you and I are chatting into the night about life and travel, it just makes me more confident to then get up the next day and try to make the world a better place than I would if I'm in this really status-oriented city where I'm trying to like compete with everyone else, you know? It builds this kind of emotional depth, I think, to do this kind of stuff from abroad. I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think it builds a lot of resilience. I think it's not just travel, it's the mindset of, I mean, anti-fragility is the same as resilience when you think about it.
Yeah, totally.
It's the same topic. It's the same principle. And
I think that you meet so many, gosh, I'm really telling you things I shouldn't.
I love things that I shouldn't know. My head is, I was going to say full of them, but I actually don't know that many things that I shouldn't know. So give me a few of them.
I think that, and you know, I think the US is particularly bad in this way, but I think it's true of everywhere. I think sometimes when you're trying to build a career, you get really distracted by, you know, do I actually respect these people, or am I just like interacting with them because I feel I have to be a part of this professional world? Where when I became a nomad, suddenly I had a surplus of people I respected, you know, like meeting people like you and, you know, so many Chateau alumni where you're like, oh my gosh, this person is so cool and inspiring. And I don't have to talk to them, but I love talking to them. And suddenly, instead of small chat being something that like you feel like you have to do, you're excited to talk to people who are also successful and also creative. And it really does end up being this like crazy boost. I didn't expect it, and I'm still so inspired by it. I mean, do you feel like that when like a new co-living comes in?
Yeah. That's one of the reasons that I'm here and I like Chateau Co-Living specifically so much, because inspiration is not something easy to find. And I did not find a lot of inspiration in, you know, my hometown, or even London's a big place, but, you know, the little pocket that I grew up in, I didn't find a lot of inspiration there. But then when I go out into the world and I see so many different ways of tackling the same problem, it makes me think, you know what? There's no right or wrong answer, but just by trying hard at something and using the right general frameworks and the right general methodologies, I can get there. And the proof is in the people that I'm meeting.
Yes.
Because they've done it.
You know what it is? I think it's courage. Every nomad you meet, you have to be a certain amount of courageous to live this way. You have to be willing to like, I'm going to just see what happens if I go live in an entirely new culture. And there are degrees of it, right? You know, for a German person coming to France, maybe is not, but it's still, there's a certain amount of willing to stand against the normative paradigm to live this way. And when you're surrounded by courageous people, there's something called collective nobility. We talk so much about like, you know, the bystander effect and how things like war crimes can happen when there's collective lack of accountability. But there's something called collective nobility where when people around each other are creative and loving and inspiring, it brings out the best in everyone. And I am such an exponentially better person than I was 4 years ago because I'm surrounded by people who like make me excited to be a part of the human race, you know? And you can't put a price on that. You can't bottle it. And like you said, that's not really an experience that's easy to access.
It's absolutely unique. Yeah. And I think an interesting word that you've mentioned is the word compound, because it does, or you said exponential, because it compounds exponentially over time. As you go down this path, it's like you learn a little bit, and that opens your perspective, which allows you to learn more and absorb more, which opens your perspective, which allows you to learn more. And for me, the biggest change that I see is when I'm constantly changing and constantly improving, I grow exponentially faster to someone who's constantly not changing and constant. It's like every single action compounds. Every time I say, yes, I'm going to do something different, and the other person says, no, I'm going to do the same thing, they stay here and I go here. And after a while, just the balance is a bit too big. Then I wonder, will they ever catch up?
But, you know, the funny thing happens, and this is why, like, I'm so passionate about your project, and I'm so passionate in general about people understanding that there's a better way to live than the way we were all sold. I think it's a very American thing that is now unfortunately expanding into other parts of the world of like, you need to secure a large income and then have some sort of nuclear family, and then you know, wait to die, I guess. But like, you know, like, but then there's this other way where a year in our life is probably like a decade in the life of some of the people from our home. And it's not because of money, and it's not even really because of travel. It's because of that curiosity that compounds. And like the bigger, it's like you're saying, like the more you grow your capacity intellectually and emotionally, suddenly you have like access to all this different world and life and beauty. And it's like, I want that for everybody. Can you imagine if everybody in the world felt that way?
It would be, if you made the world feel that way, Jocelyn, you would have successfully changed the world. Let's change the world.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. We're out of time, but it was really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
And the good thing is, I get to keep talking to you. Even though these lot don't, but I do. Thank you, Jocelyn.
That was awesome.
It was awesome.
Thank you for having me.